Hello, everybody who's here and everybody who will be hopefully watching in the future. This is the one of these meeting of the Disabled and Non-Disabled Alliance here at Sacramento State University. Stingers up, I don't know. This week, it's personal, literally. This topic is consent and intimacies. The basic running idea here is that this is a frequent problem for disabled people. This topic represents a problem that frequently disabled people encounter. Out in the public and in the medical field and so on and so forth, we will get there. But yeah, that's the topic and we're going to be talking about it. There isn't so much of a political bent to this one as there normally is, but it will go to sort of it's naturally going to progress into sort of heavy topics and or sexy topics as we proceed forward. So let that be your content warning for those of you who like content warnings. And then if that's all right, we can proceed to the agenda, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. So yeah, we're going to do announcements, and the procedure is going to go basically the sort of philosophy behind consent, what that is, what it means to people, and then ways in which consent becomes an area of problem for people when it is specifically when it is ignored, or rather when it is not made a priority, establishing it, and then sort of a brief discussion about how to mechanically establish consent. There's the communication to be done there. And then it's going to proceed to the sexy stuff, disabled people and sex, which is a rather dense topic in a sense, but also quite deceptively simple. If you're thinking like a philosopher, it's hard. If you think of like a person, it's very easy. And then brief media recommendations. Just basically, this is the further reading section. So yeah, but first and foremost, the announcements. There's something fun here. Okay, we're almost to the end of the semester, and good luck on your finals. I know I will need it. They're mostly essays for me, but there's also a German final coming up for me personally, and that's gonna kick me in the German speaking team. So Friday of finals week, we're having a party at 7 p.m. Correct me if I'm wrong. That's a Dana party, right? We've scheduled that. Or is that for a different sort of organization? Sorry, I wasn't paying attention enough. Cool. Yes, good.
Anyone can join.
The Friday of finals. I forget exactly which date that is on the top of my head, but yes, that'll be a thing. There will be much fun and merriments. There's also a non-zero chance it'll just be us officers here. That's fun too. Then there is in my mind, a very important thing is the Student Organizations and Leadership Diversity Leadership Conference that's happening in, if I'm not mistaken, January. There's going to be some freedom with regard to what we do, if anything, at this conference, but I really want us to do something. So I'm hoping to get input and opinions and ideas on the idea for a program we can do. In the ambiguity of the fact that we don't necessarily know what the facilities look like yet, or at least I don't. And so I want to garner that feedback, and I want to put together that idea and submit a proposal by December 8th, which is the deadline for student organizations and leadership that is set for us. So if you have anything to sort of add to that discussion, I would love to hear it. It might just be like an expose on the club or establishing us as a presence in the community. That's part of what I'm hoping to accomplish here, or what I think would be good to accomplish here, is getting the name of Dana out there at the conference. So yeah, with that in mind, and do follow up with us on Discord or the Discord server or via email if you have any contributions that you want to make there, and we'll get in touch. Okay. I'm unscripted, can you tell? Okay, on to the important bit. The importance of consent, I would say, as an expression of bodily autonomy, as a form of bodily autonomy. The concepts here become slightly muddy if you're overthinking it like I am, but again, it's very straightforward in normal human speak. Establishing consent is just the act of asking and getting permission to do something that involves someone else. The mechanics here vary, but the idea is just that, getting people's permission and I should say like informed enthusiastic consent is often the language used in sexual context, but it applies everywhere. That's the whole idea. The ethics here is somewhat more convoluted, but we don't actually necessarily need to get into them because we basically all agree on the basic premises behind bodily autonomy. It's your body, and as much as you have anything, you have your body, and it is something that ought to be, if we live in any kind of fair society, be respected by other people to the greatest extent that is possible. And at the moment we're going to get into, that it is frequently not respected to the greatest extent possible. So yeah, one of the topics here is no, this is just general. Sorry, we can we'll get to the specifics, I think. But yeah, well, and we can talk more about the sort of the conceptual and the philosophical, the ethical part of it as we develop those specific bits and pieces. Okay, so yeah, so first of all, the public setting, the public sphere, where for disabled people in particular, the establishment of consent is often not prioritized, or the existence of the ability or the necessity for consent is straight up ignored. So one of the ways this manifests, and we'll have a few bullet points here, but strangers helping you out in public if you have particularly like mobility or visual impairments, and this is like visible to other people. It's a frequent issue that people get, helped, touched, manipulated, otherwise accosted by total strangers who don't bother asking, and for obvious reasons, this is a problem. I wonder exactly what could be going through the mind of one who does that. Just it almost has to be, and we'll discuss it further, but in my mind, it almost has to be like a paternalism. There's a certain way you have to understand a person as like childlike in order to help without knowing what helping actually means. And strangers touching without the consent. Yeah. One of the points I'm reading here, and I promise I've read this before, but here we go. Is it being impossible to knowing the intentions of the person doing the touching, doing the helping? It still manifests as an insult to bodily autonomy, and it can often have consequences far beyond that, in the form of accidents, broken equipment, broken bodies, things of that nature. Someone who doesn't understand your body taking some form of control of your body is obviously going to be a problem, not just ethically, but probably consequentially.
Yeah, and something I want to add to this is like,
Yeah.
if you see like someone like in a wheelchair struggling, like on a hill, the first thing you should do is ask them if they need help, and like if they do need help, like help them as much as you can. But like
Yeah.
if they don't need help, then don't help them at all. They can
If you
handle
see
it.
them struggling and you leap to save them by pushing their chair without asking first, they're not gonna think you're helping. Even if you say, "Here, let me help you," they're gonna think they're being kidnapped, and they are going to fight you because they think they're being kidnapped. Anybody would, right? If you grab somebody and move their body without permission, they're gonna think they're being kidnapped.
And I would wonder, statistically speaking, how close that is to being like the correct assumption to make. Like, it's probably a minority of cases, but hard to say. But yeah, to you, the viewer, may not be able to tell, but the other two people in this Zoom room with me are themselves wheelchair users. Take it from them. You'll want to ask permission before helping. We will get to the specific recommendations. For now, the topic of the day is the ways in which consent is being ignored. And I think we have one more slide in the public sphere. This is basically covering, as I understand, like medical equipment more specifically, and the consequences that can follow from manipulating medical equipment when you don't understand what that medical equipment does, and or when you assume that you already do understand what that medical equipment does and what it is for, and how it works. Uh, oh, yes, I'm going to cover this in detail as well. Service animals are sort of, I've never had one or used one, but from my understanding, they are something like a lifeline to the folks who need them. So to take some kind of control over a service animal to distract it from its job is potentially very harmful. And if you see a service animal, it's very difficult to tell a priori what that service animal is for, what its job is. So to distract it from doing that job can be, it's impossible to know in advance, but the good rule of thumb is to not do that. So yeah, do there what I understand about this presentation, I'm going to step back from it for a second, is that there's a lot of text. I encourage everyone who's viewing this to find and read that text. Yeah. So yeah, because all of it, I'm not representing all of it. I'm just sort of blitzing through it so we can go to more a sort of freer discussion because my actual presentation skills are very lacking. But this is all the sort of the worthy editorializing of the Disabled Non-Disabled Alliance. It represents the views of us and some useful knowledge to carry forward. But again, I'm not just going to read aloud. Firstly, because I can't, and secondly,
I think I'm
because
gonna
there's too
take
much of
over
it.
for a bit. Yeah, I think I'm gonna take over for a bit, like a slide or two. So
Yeah.
I guess especially like service animals, like these service animals are doing their job. So like you can't just pet them. It'll just like stop them from doing their actual job and keeping that disabled person safe. Like for example, for diabetes, those service dogs can detect if they have like diabetes or seizures episodes, and can actually like help them. But like say, like another example is like if that service dog is leading a blind person crossing the street, you shouldn't touch the dog at all because the blind person could actually get hurt. And like more like about like mobility aids, it's like an extension of their body. So like if someone is like say for example, you're putting your foot on top of someone's like wheelchair, like they can actually feel it. Like yeah, they can actually feel it, and they like don't really like it. Like especially for me, like my brothers sometimes I guess like put their feet on my chair sometimes to kind of like rest like their feet. But like I always ask them like, can you stop? Because yeah, it's not something. It's like for example, you want to put your foot on someone's like leg. It's exactly like that. And like if you see someone struggling, like I said earlier, you should definitely like help them. I mean, you have to ask before helping.
Can I add to that?
Yeah.
A couple things. My dad used to lean on my wheelchair repeatedly whenever we were like standing next to each other. And what I would do, it didn't matter if we were in front of his friends, I would just move so that he wouldn't be able to keep leaning on it. And I didn't care if he fell because he shouldn't be leaning on my chair because he didn't ask. Um, and the thing is that if they ask, like, "Hey, I'm feeling a bit tired. Can I lean on your wheelchair for a bit?" Sure, whatever. "Hey, my hands are full. Can I hang some of my stuff on your wheelchair?" Sure, whatever. But if you don't ask, I will do whatever's in my power to get you off or to get your stuff off. I don't care if you fall. I don't care if your stuff breaks. This is my chair. It's attached to my body. It's an extension of my body. You wouldn't hang your bag on some random stranger's shoulder. Like, what is the logic in that? Um, and with the service animal thing, I've seen people who use service animals as being abusive to animals. And just to clarify, that's not how that works. The way you train service animals is not abusive. It specifically builds on the animal's strengths. And if it's very clear that the animal isn't cut out for the service that they're being trained for, they stop training and they get kindly rehomed to people who want to keep the animal as a normal pet. And even the people who use the service animals, they still treat the animal as a part of their family, as a pet. They still take them for walks and dog park time so they can just be a normal pet for enough time during the day. And then when they're working, so much focus is put into their job that they are working so hard. Do you know how much focus it takes for a dog to focus on guiding their person through a busy, noisy city? They're doing such a great job, but because they're putting so much hard work and effort into into doing their job right, that's why it's so crucial that you don't purposefully distract them while they're working. So it's not just not petting them, it's also don't call for the dog. Don't yell out, doggy, and try to call it over like, here, puppy. Because one, that's not your dog. And two, they're working. So just elaboration on that.
Yeah, absolutely. That's absolutely right. You should definitely like not bother someone if they're doing their job. And I guess we can move on to the next slide. This is more around like medical. So inherent dehumanization of seeing disabilities as a problem to be fixed leads directly to severe and repeating crossing of the boundaries. So some people still see disabilities as something to be fixed, as something that like if you have it, they're like second class citizens. But that's not really the case. They're just humans that's having a disability. They're just different in a way. Informed consent is a vital concept in medicine, but there are ways to manipulate the process of getting informed consent accidentally or deliberately, like, for example, forced sterilization. And I guess Ryan can talk more about this, right?
Yes. Oh, there it is. Yeah. Forced sterilization is still a thing in some states because as a parent, you can call state services and arrange for your child, if they are disabled, to be forcibly sterilized in childhood, um, because you are concerned about the effects that having a functioning or non-functioning but present reproductive system can have on their body, or you don't want them to have kids, or you don't think they'll ever be fit to be parents, biological parents, um, stuff like that. And it it's not illegal fully yet. It's heavily frowned upon by the general public if they knew, but most people don't. Um, which is why it continues to fly under the radar. And the issue of being presented with uninformed information about what's going to happen to you and your body, and then consenting to it, and then having your rights trampled on because you gave consent even though you weren't given fully informed consent. That issue overlaps greatly, not only with the disabled community, but also on various other marginalized groups, such as the Black community in America, virtually every Native American tribe, um, many African groups have have had trouble with this in the past. Immigrants from China and Mexico struggle with this. It's been happening on our borders um, in our immigrant detention centers where people are waiting to get in, and meanwhile they are told that they have to have these medical procedures. They're not fully informed of what exactly they are, but they agree to it because they are told that they need it for their own health, and then it turns out that they were forcibly sterilized or worse.
Yeah, yeah,
And there
that's definitely like a really talked about like subject that people that you should definitely like read up on if you haven't, because that's a big part of U.S. history.
there are subtler ways this can manifest too. Sorry, we only have the one slide on on the medical portion, but to
Oh
my
yeah,
mind, it's
elaborate.
probably the biggest one. The the subtle ways it can manifest, these sort of unintentional things that you can do, is, I'll put it this way. The example that comes to mind, and it's not by analogy, is the set of terms and conditions that pops up whenever you install something on your phone, right? No one reads that because we kind of basically all understand these days that it's a lot of legalese to the effect of Facebook gets to sell your information, and you don't really have to like care about that too much. It's probably not going to impact you. In a medical setting, that same thing happens, but it matters a lot because the thing you're reading, the thing maybe you can't read, I'll get there, is the description of the risks involved in the surgery you're about to get. It sometimes happens, at least it can happen. It's an easy to imagine scenario that you get a very long form consent form that you obviously have to sign because you're here for medical treatment, but it details the risks and the procedure that you're about to undergo. And maybe you're like me and you can't read very well. Maybe you can't read much at all. I think if the language barrier is sometimes a problem for folks, but things like a visual barrier are significantly worse in that same respect, because you can't learn against a visual barrier. You could have somebody like read the whole thing aloud to you, but how? Who are you going to ask? And that's one of a myriad of ways in which you can very subtly, unintentionally have your sort of informed consent undermined by the medical practices for no other reason than because your disability is not being accounted for. That is to say, it's a disability, it's not being accounted for. So yeah, we'll come to the ways, maybe hopefully a better understanding of how to establish it, both in medical settings and elsewhere. But the thing I hope that people take away from this is that it's not always intentional. It's not always obvious or deliberate, I should say, because the simple fact of having a disability is that you are subject to a system that is not well suited to you, right? So that transfers over to the medical settings, which don't have a way to account for maybe a person with very little control over the hands, right? That occasionally happens, and it means you can't literally sign things. You'd have to have like a notary with you, and how? Yeah, that's gonna be the general message. Like that's a thing to look out for in establishment of informed consent in medical settings and elsewhere, but particularly in medical settings where it matters a lot. Okay. So continue with the problem, and it's very much related to the medical stuff, is the field of caregiving. And I expect we're going to have a good deal to say on this one besides what I have to contribute. But basically the thing here is that it sometimes happens that a disability is such that you have to have some kind of in-home care or an operation, or maybe you're in the hospital for some reason and the same thing occurs. You have usually a nurse or a nurse practitioner with you, some kind of ideally medically educated caregiver who is sort of administering to you the sort of basic life stuff for whatever reason, for any number of reasons, you might not be able to do all by yourself. And the establishment of consent in a setting like this is crucial to the dignity of ordinary people. Like, unless you have a very particular psychology about it, you are going to need to be giving permission a lot in a setting like this in order not to be affronted with what happens to you, what's done to you. One of the biggest points here is that sometimes people don't want to go along with one of the care, and this is, I will encourage editorializing on this one because it's not a thing I have personal experience with, but a thing that can happen is that in general, the act of non-compliance with a caregiver is acts as, I will say, an invitation to ignore the establishment of consent in that context, which is to say that like the caregiver will do something to you, the disabled person, which you don't want to happen, which maybe you are actively resisting, and in response, you'll be forced to do whatever it happens to be. And to my knowledge, like the law is basically on the side of the caregiver here. It's very easy to say, if not the law, then like the policy is very much on the side of the caregiver here, because it's very easy to make the defense, I was just doing my job. We needed to get this done in a timely fashion. Especially, I have a little bit of sympathy for caregivers here, because there are time constraints to any medical job you will encounter, and it can be difficult. But that is hardly an excuse to ignore the establishment of consent, to have a to do your job in such a way that it is a trauma, or at least an affront to the dignity of the person to whom you're providing care. I mean, that would be, it's honestly oxymoronic. And the particular example here given is that of showering, which is difficult for many disabled folks. And the general point that's being made here is I think the right one, that you can achieve the right ends in various different ways, and in general, that's going to constitute the tactic for achieving those ends correctly, achieving those ends with the establishment of consent. I'll bring in a term from philosophy here: multiple realizability. You can manifest the shower through multiple different forms of implementation of the shower, and therefore it's not necessary. It is unlikely ever to be necessary to like unconsentedly strip or drug the person to whom you're supposed to be administering care as a caregiver of any kind. And I'm going to say one last thing here and then turn it over, but the thing that occurs to me, and this is very much in the moment, is that caregiving is not always done by a medical professional. It is often administered, I would even speculate more often administered, especially to the elderly and disabled, by family members, by people with no explicit medical training whatsoever. Which is to say, people who know that those family members are likely to know those family members very well, the caregiver and the caregivee, I suppose, the care gifted, I don't know, are likely to already have some rapport, some relationship, but the establishment of consent is not less important in that context. And indeed, it might be to offend that consent is likely to be even worse in a setting where it's family or otherwise somebody who knows you very well. Because in an informal setting like that, who are you going to go to? Who do you complain to if you are able to complain with the system that they give you? Unclear. It's just but basically the point here that I'm going to make is just that the establishment of consent in a caregiving setting is conceptually necessary to the doing of caregiving. Like if it is not there, if it's not present, if you haven't got consent established when you do stuff and for how you do stuff as a caregiver, what you're doing is something else. And that's not an accusation, but it's definitely not caregiving, whatever it is. So there you go. Do we? I assume we do have things to add here, so I'll turn it over now.
Yeah, something I want to add is just about like the caregiving like industry. Some like caregivers are overworked. Like for example, on one night, one caregiver takes care of like 10 people, and that's definitely like tough. And, like maybe that's one of the ways that contributes to dragging, because they just want to make it easy and make it fast as like they can.
And that's precisely the problem, because it shouldn't be about speed, it should be about meeting people's needs in a way that respects them as another human being, and drugging does the exact opposite of that. It takes away their individuality and their sense of self, their ability to say yes and no. Um, and that's exactly the problem, because then we're treated like slabs of meat that need to be prepackaged and taken care of systematically on a timely fashion, rather than people who need to be treated with respect and taken care of. And that's why we need more people in the field, but we also need the field itself to become better, because the way it's evolved and changed so far is horrendous and ugly, and quite frankly, something I never want to be involved in. And I'm purposefully making a point to never hire a professional caregiver simply because of the things that they are taught is okay, and the sheer volume of stuff I need to deprogram from them when conducting my caregiving to make sure that I don't get hurt. Um, to make sure that they're listening to me, because they're taught that they know best because they went through all these years of training, and because I could be seen as not compliant, they can just ignore me. Um, and that's not how it should work. If I'm being non-compliant, that means I have an issue with something, and I am perfectly willing to work it out with you. It does not mean that I am contrarian and will not listen to a single thing you say and will actively undermine my own care at every given opportunity. Um, for example, this showering example here came up specifically because I have hired one professional caregiver in my whole life thus far, and he has worked in a professional capacity. I had to detrain him and then retrain him, and he explained to me this very example, um, because we were talking about how I struggle with showering and how do we get me to shower while I'm up at school. And he didn't force me, but he told me about how people like me are often treated in more institutionalized settings, how I would probably be drugged and showered against my will anyway, because they don't see no as a no. They see no as an, okay, I'm in charge now, instead of, no, this is my body, I do what I want. Um, and we eventually worked it out through the specific example listed below, with using a sponge attached to a stick to help me wash without him seeing or touching me, because that was a huge issue with me. I value my privacy. But this terrifies me. And I know he wasn't lying because he's worked there. He's seen it firsthand. Um, so it's a huge issue. And with family, this happens with kids who aren't disabled either. Like, not specifically the showering thing, but not being listened to, having their bodily autonomy disrespected, um, not being taught that they have control of their own body, that they can give or take away consent. They just are told, you need to do this because I'm the adult and I'm telling you to do so, not you need to do this because it's good for you and it'll help you grow, or it'll help people hang out with you. Like, nobody wants to hang out with somebody who's stinky, right? Um, but forcing people to do things, that's the catch. There's no instance where it's genuinely acceptable. You can't force people to do things. It doesn't matter if they're disabled. It doesn't matter if they're a kid. It doesn't matter if they're a criminal. You can't force them to do things. It's not ethical on any level.
A general point of in ethics that's just is driving home to my mind is that an ethic of care, and it's there are various sort of philosophers contemporary with us, like they're working right now on an articulation of an ethic of care. This is sort of the feminist school of thought that's more recently developed than say usual ethical theory, the typical ethical theory you'll be taught in most philosophy classes. The ethic of care doesn't necessarily talk about consent, as far as I know. It does. It talks about. It doesn't talk about like things like the right to bodily autonomy and these sorts of things. But here at the end of the problems, it's driving home for me that those constructs will be in an ethic that is about taking care of people, in an ethic that is about getting people the things that they need and allowing them to flourish. rather than like an ethic that is about, I don't know, following the correct rules. The establishing of consent is going to be in there somewhere, like for if for no other reason than because to not do so would be traumatic, but also because the act of caregiving, the act of living with a caregiver is the act of living with another person. It's not, you are not supposed to be a job, for someone else. As much as there are tasks involved, the ethic of the point of care, that the purpose of care is to allow flourishing, whatever that happens to mean for you. So it would be, again, like I said the same thing about like medicine, but it would be oxymoronic, like not to have reasonable discussions with the people of whom you're trying to take care. Like, yeah, because to ignore that autonomy outright, even if its expression needs to be complex, would be antithetical to what care is, what it conceptually means, and all of it means. So yeah, and the other thing I'm going to say is, like, I'm going to make a media recommendation later when we get to that bit. But for now, I want to say that like the problems that persist in like professional caregiving are honestly not dissimilar to the problems that are likely to persist in like non-professional caregiving. It is a matter of economizing, isn't it? Like you have, if you're in a nursing home, let's say, you have so many patients, and I don't mean to say that you have a number of patients. I mean, you have so many patients to whom you have to administer care, or of some kind. And in order to do that, to do that well, you'd have to spend a lot of time doing it. You don't have that much time. I mean, yeah, probably the facility is understaffed, but also like the day ends. People need their stuff done at the end of like a 12 to 24-hour period, and just don't have enough time if you're one person with many patients. You also might not have like the ability to use that time to establish a modus operandi for each individual patient. There's a triaging going on in professional settings where the consent sort of has to be, as a function of time and resources, has to be put on the back burner in order to get done the specific and concrete things that need doing. And that's going to be a problem of industry, and not so much, and less a problem of the individual, because the individual basically has no way to avoid it in that setting. So that's going to be, yeah, that'll be a thing we're having to work on as a society, especially as our population gets older. It's going to turn out to be very important to have a more robust and more humanitarian system of professional industrial caregiving, if it needs to be industrial at all. I tend to think not, but that does not reflect the opinions of Dana. Okay, that's the problems. I think we're coming upon the bit where we talk about solutions or methods for getting solutions, I guess. And there's, on my part, is very general points to be made here. The most straightforward way to establish consent, and we've said it a bunch of times now, but it's worth repeating, is just to straight up ask. If the person you're dealing with is has some kind of mobility impairment, usually that person is also perfectly capable of having and expressing the mental state of consent and communicating that to you. So just flat out asking is going to be the best way, regardless of how awkward it is. I, for one, am very awkward, so it would be awkward, but it's worth it. It's going to have to be worth it because of the problems we've outlined so far. Now, at that point, it gets slightly more complicated. Like, if the person can, if you have before you a person that is perfectly capable of having and expressing to you the informed consent that is required for the ethical mode of caregiving that you want to do, fine and hunky dory. Like that's that's as good as it gets. It is sometimes a problem, and sometimes a reasonable question to ask. Like, whether or not the person you're talking to, it can have consent. In other words, can fully understand, like say the medical procedure that's about to happen and the risks involved with it, or can fully or can fully articulate consent if it is established. Like, many disabilities impact one's ability to communicate. Personally, if I were speaking to a deaf person who could not read lips, but could only sign, I would have basically no way of establishing consent except by like charades. It's very difficult for me to communicate with somebody who is not speaking to me or writing for me. Similarly, like somebody who's nonverbal, or somebody with a particular expression of autism, or somebody with a very sort of limited control over the sort of motions of the body, may have a very difficult time expressing consent, even if it's fully given, for the same reason as such a person might have a difficult time expressing any thought, because to us, the mode of communication that is acceptable to such a person is basically foreign. Like, there are such modes of communication, people have proven it. But for me, at least, like somebody who's basically uninformed about, nonverbal forms of communication, or rather, nonverbal, I'll say that covers non-written as well. These are basically foreign languages, like whatever mode of communication is accessible to that particular person might not be accessible to me because I just don't understand it well. Likewise, if you as an institution would have to provide the resources for that mode of communication to be actualized, then it's even more difficult. But such person can be perfectly capable of like having all the same sorts of complex thoughts. Like, again, I say this, people have proven it. With one of the sort of more intellectually interesting activists that I know about is a kid named Ito, who's a very, I say severe, but a very particular case of autism, which limits the amount of control he has over his body and renders him totally nonverbal. It took a very, very long time for him to get other people to understand that he was fully understanding of what was happening around him, because the mode of communication had to be different. And exactly how different, I don't actually know. But that's a general point. Like, the communication had to be established in order for consent to be given, but that proved difficult. It proved non-standard. But yeah, a secondary point I will make is that for those who would be able to communicate consent, no problem if it were had, but it's not clear whether or not they can have the sort of right mental states, have the right understanding of it. That's more complicated. That's frankly a set of ethical questions I do not have answers to. But that's going to have to be okay. Like, we don't have easy answers, and frankly, it's not anybody's job to come up with easy answers. So it's just going to have to be complicated. Understanding individual people and in as much complexity as can be understood about them is going to have to be the modus operandi here. There's, as I understand, if there's any way to understand like as an outside party, as a third party, whether or not the person you're speaking with, or the person you're trying to administer care to, or whatever, can have and communicate consent, is to understand that person's situation. In other words, there's no one rule. There's no one thing you can do to establish consent, as far as I know. There's no one single reliable method. It's just going to have to be bespoke to individual people. So, yeah. I basically don't have anything else except those general points. And I would encourage you to look up, if you have the luxury of it, Ido, IDO. It's just a dude with a particular case of autism, who has to communicate in very particular ways, has to have caregiving, and there's a very interesting story about it. So yeah. Do we have? I want to ask the room as well. Do we have anything to sort of add to the slide? I know I didn't just like read through it, and maybe should have, but there we go.
Yeah, I mean, I guess go like like add on to it, like especially on the fourth point, so like distinguishing between a difference of communication and a difference of cognition is crucial. Like for example, if they might instinctively say yes if you ask, but then get visibly upset when you start doing it. Like at that point, when they start feeling like upset about it, then you should definitely like ask them again. And if they have like trouble answering, you can just give them like 3 or 4 choices or 2 choices. Like look at this example. Like if you ask if you can hug them and they say yes, but then you push them away when you hug them, you can ask, do you want a hug, a handshake, or a wave? It's all about paying attention to them and their body language as they know it. So it would also help to make it clear that they should take the lead with what they're most comfortable with.
It's kind of like dancing, really. You have to pay attention to what the other person is doing, and you have to communicate with them in whatever method works best in that moment. Um, you have to play off of each other's reactions, and this is for everyday stuff as well. Like with the hug example, if you go to hug someone and they push you away, that's a very clear no. You wouldn't continue trying to hug them. You would check in with them and ask what they want to do or tell them to do what they are most comfortable with. So if you tell them, okay, you don't have to hug me, it's okay, what would you like to do? And then they run away to go play video games, that is what they're most comfortable doing, right? It's okay for them to do that. It's you Nobody is entitled to any sort of interaction, which is why consent is a thing.
I want to make one further point, the articulation of which has only just occurred to me. The nature of many disabilities is to sort of, and I'm specifically thinking about like communication related disabilities, the ones that rather affect how and whether you can sort of easily communicate with other people what you are thinking. The nature of many of those disabilities, the reason we call them disabilities is because they break the code, because they don't lend themselves to the usual ways in which we communicate. So the act of paying attention is going to have to be, it seems like if there's any reliable way, that's going to have to be it. I will also say that we're heading into the bit about intimacy and sex, an area where I have, and I'm gonna make this public now, literally no experience whatsoever. So that's on the internet forever. So I'm going to basically turn it over for that, but I will say I'm going to turn it over right after I make this joke. If it's like a dance, then I am screwed. I'm done. I can't do it. Okay, we can go.
Should I lead with this or should you, Brian?
Yeah, you can do it.
Profanity in the PowerPoint lead.
Recovering from that joke.
Oh wait, I can say something. We're sexy as fuck. That isn't acknowledged enough. We're sexy as fuck.
Yeah. So many disabled people can have sexual encounters that are satisfying for both them and their partners. Just gonna clear that up right away. Because one notorious interaction that a lot of people in wheelchairs get specifically is, can we have sex? The answer is, it's none of your fucking business, but also yes. And people who are visibly disabled online will get those sort of questions in their DMs, and it's incredibly uncomfortable, very creepy. 0 out of 10, do not recommend, but yes, we can have sex, and it can be very good sex. It'll probably be better sex than you will ever have, so take that. And that's specifically because we have to communicate with each other, and we have to listen to each other. We have to make sure that we're both or all of us are comfortable with what we're doing. So disabled people are sexy as fuck. And many disabled people also have unique relationship with our sexual identities. Some disabled people are asexual, others are gay, others are straight, and the feelings about sex vary greatly as well. For example, they could hold a lot of trauma around it, given that the statistics on rape involving disabled people are unnervingly high. And that's probably, the statistics are probably the undercount, really, given how hard it is to report those types of incidents, both emotionally and systemically. Or maybe they were misinformed about sex and sex ed, and that's how their opinion formed about it. Or maybe people harassed them over those people's preconceived notions of how they could or could not have sex. Maybe they're extremely sex positive and they totally are down to fuck at any given moment. Maybe they only do it with a select few people, or maybe they're entirely sex repulsed. I don't know where I land in that, but I think I'm sex repulsed. I'll figure it out. But the point is that disabled people are not a monolith. We are not all sexless, innocent virgins, and we are not all super excited about having sex because, oh my gosh, somebody wants to have sex with us? That's incredibly insulting. We're just like any other average group of people, and one community member's feelings about it or experiences with it will be different from the next. Any contributions?
I may have one, but I should wait until we've covered
Okay.
the bulk of this.
So fulfilling relationships are attainable by all of us. And what I said earlier about, oh, people want to have sex with us, that's the thing. We shouldn't be internally grateful whenever someone chooses to enter a relationship with us or shows us affection. We have dignity too, and just because we face a lot of ableist shitheads doesn't mean we have to settle with other people's choices. We can have standards. We are allowed to have standards. I highly encourage you to have standards, right? You don't have to settle for someone just because they're one of the few people that have shown you affection. You will find someone that's good for you, and you shouldn't feel like you need to put yourself in a vulnerable position just because this might be the only chance you get. Because that's a lie. It's not going to be the only chance you get. And even if it is, it's not worth it. You are worth respect. And if they aren't respecting you, then the relationship is not worth it. This especially goes for abusive relationships and toxic behaviors. No one should be made to feel like they have to be grateful for being treated as less than, for being sexually harassed, objectified, or raped. So don't settle for people who treat you like trash just because they tell you, oh, I'm the only person that will have sex with you. That is not true. It's a lie, and you deserve better. So there are 3 key concepts, in my mind anyway, for sexual encounters that should always be incorporated: consent, which we discussed, communication, and safety. Consent and constant communication are the single most important things in a sexual encounter with disabled people, with anyone really, but especially so with disabled people. You have to find a way to effectively communicate that works for everyone involved. It can be verbal, signed, it could be a particular signal like 3 taps on a limb or something. It could be a word, like a safe word, or it could be an image board, or it could be a piece of paper with different words on it that you could point to, etc. as long as everyone involved understands it, it's totally okay. It doesn't have to be conventional, just something that works. You also need to discuss boundaries before and during your time together, check up on each other often, and be flexible. It's totally okay to stop mid-action to take a break, especially if your partner or you are hypermobile or have chronic fatigue. Um, you don't have to push yourself to the limit just to do things the conventional way, because the whole point is that you guys are spending time together because you want to be together, and you need to take it at your own pace that's the most safe and comfortable for everybody involved. This one is pretty common, and I'm sure you've heard it before, but it needs saying. Excuse me. My nose is always extremely stuffy in the evening. It's been like this since I was 12. I don't know why. Anyway, always use condoms and be vigilant about testing for sexually transmitted diseases, STDs, and make sure to share if you have a transmissible STD before starting any activity. I specifically say transmissible because if you got tested after contracting it and the doctor says, okay, you're all clear, like you have it, but you're not going to transmit it anymore, that is your personal information, and I wouldn't expect you to share that because the doctor gave you the go-ahead. But if it is transmissible, I highly recommend telling people before doing anything, because it could put them in extreme danger if they contract it. Make sure to wash all relevant body parts before and after activities with soap. With soap for at least 30 seconds. I'm looking at the cis men, especially the ones watching this, because the track record for not washing your hands properly is horrible. It's disgusting. It's disgusting. So you need to actually wash your hands if you want to do sex, okay? Nobody wants a dirty man. You have to be a clean man, okay? And this isn't just for cis men, obviously, but just specifically because their track record is so bad. That's why I'm pointing it out. But for everyone, use soap and wash for at least 30 seconds. And one complaint I see from people when you talk about, safe practices and stuff is that it's lame and boring. I just gotta say, this adds to why disabled people are sexy as fuck, because assisting your disabled partner with safety procedures can be just as sexy as the sex actions themselves. Because just think about it, okay? You're helping them shower. You're helping them put on a condom. Like, come on. Come on. Don't complain, just do it.
This is a
Safety
surprisingly
first
soft
and
slide.
make it sexy. Like I mentioned earlier, sexual encounters can be tiring or even dangerous for some people given chronic fatigue. Maybe they have sensory issues. Maybe they have hypermobility, which can involve a risk of dislocation during certain activities. So take it at the speed that works best for you and discuss your needs with each other to see how you can work on fulfilling them together. You don't want anyone involved to dislocate a limb. That would be very painful, and it's supposed to be a pleasure activity. So just take it at the speed that works best and work around it the way you need to, and no pressure on making it the most typical sex encounter ever. It doesn't have to be like you see on the porn movies or TV, do what works for you, because it's all about you, not what society thinks is normal for these types of encounters. Um, and this lends into the consent thing. Stop means stop. That's what it means. It means stop. It doesn't mean keep going. Stop means stop. But also, that isn't the only word that does mean stop. Stop can also look like, hold on, wait, I'm not sure. Can we take a break? Or non-verbally, it can be pushing back or kind of blocking what you're doing or stepping away. If you get any communication like that, verbal or nonverbal, from your partner, that's anything other than an enthusiastic or sexy yes, double check with them and listen to their response. It doesn't always mean you've done something wrong necessarily or that they don't like you. It's not always a rejection. It just means they put up a boundary, and that's what you need to respect, the boundary. Everyone has their limits, and those limits not only look different from person to person, but they can vary from day to day or even hour to hour, depending on their mood, mental health, stress levels, energy levels, etc. The most important part is that you respect whatever boundaries they put in place in that moment. It doesn't matter if they said it was okay yesterday or an hour ago. If they tell you it's not okay now, you have to listen. So after going over all that, it might feel cheesy or awkward to communicate this much with your partners at first, but the more you practice it, the more you'll get used to it. And it's always better to communicate than to stay silent and accidentally cross a boundary without realizing it. Especially because being in the middle of a sexual encounter can be a very vulnerable moment for a lot of people, and they might be afraid to speak up in the moment if you do accidentally cross boundary. If you communicate often, effectively, and respectfully, the chances of this happening are exponentially lower, and everyone involved will be a lot happier and have a much better time.
I want to add to that a little bit.
Yeah.
Take it as citation needed, but there is, to my understanding, research that suggests strongly that, and this is I'll get there, but like that queer couples have better and more satisfying sex than straight couples typically, statistically, based on like self-reported data and everything. But take that at face value. The reason postulated for like why that might be, the reason that makes some sense, is that for straight couples there is a code, right? There's a way in which you are generally understood as supposed to do relationships, supposed to have sex, supposed to, general sort of ways of not only establishing consent, but like ways of doing the thing. And the nature of being queer, and the reason we use that term at all, and I say we, and I mean, let me revise that. The reason that term is used is that the nature of the thing is to break the code, that it's a divergent from the statistical norm. So the code is broken. You have, as a couple, to figure out how to have sex in a way that is satisfying. And so you come up with a way that is bespoke, that is tailored to you and your partner. Partner with the bracket S, a closed bracket. And what that means, what that translates to in the long run, is that it's awkward at first. You have to come up with a method, a modus operandum, but then if you do that well, it's significantly more satisfying sex. And like straight couples aren't prompted to have that conversation. Likewise, for disability, at least potentially, the code is broken. At least if the disability is remotely applicable to sex, then you are officially out of the range of things that will have been covered in sex ed or in porn or whatever. So, at least probably. So, you're going to have to come up with a way, and it's going to be awkward at first, and that's necessary, even completely normal. But what that translates to in the long run is that the net effect is that the sex will almost inevitably be better, simply because it's more tailored to what you and your partner, bracket S close bracket, want from sex and relationships and everything else. So there's there's that. Honestly, it's you could take that same idea, that same like argument, and make the case that like straight couples should just always assume the code is broken, because then you have to come up with something new and better. So yeah, that's my strictly conceptual contribution.
Sex and disability are two words that you don't often hear together. And if you do, it's like, oh, those people have sex?
Just to clarify, this is the media recommendations bit.
Most artists with disabilities have not had a chance to incubate their work publicly. There are no spaces where we get celebrated.
We don't usually get directorial feedback that is not trying to shove our disability or a race or a class or a gender away.
For once, you see something to do with your life depicted on the stage. It blows your mind.
Have you been called less than human?
Just another example of what a cripple looks like.
Have you been asked not to breathe? There is no right or wrong body of a conscious, revolutionary mind.
Another example of what a cripple looks like.
That's right. Yeah, I got you, got, they got, we all got. We got them from all angles, all angles. I got you, got, they got, we all got.
That was fun. This is media recommendations. Yeah. I want to. Do you want to describe what we were just looking at? Because I'm uninitiated.
This is Sins Invalid, which is a play on word because disabled people used to be called invalids. Sins Invalid is a performance group that focuses on the sexual liberation of disabled people. They are incredibly talented and they really work hard at uplifting and bringing to life the visions of their artists. I highly recommend checking them out if you're interested in learning more on this topic. And also, they are very big on activism as well. It's not all about sex, except in the form that it's something that they are not making an effort to repress or box away. It's intrinsic to what they do, but not fully present in everything they do, if that makes sense. It's more a background topic when they're discussing other things, but always relevant, if that makes any sense. They have plenty of resources on their website, and they frequently host interviews with prominent disabled activists. I signed up for their newsletter a few years ago. They've always got something interesting going on. They have tons and tons of resources. They have a great handbook that came out a couple years ago that's a guide to disability justice and what it means. And that film trailer was for their performance, one of their collections of performances. They've had others since then. This one was particularly interesting, I found, and impactful for me because it was what introduced me to them. And yeah, their YouTube link is at the bottom as well as their website link. I highly recommend checking them out. They've got a lot to say, and it's definitely worth listening to what they have to say.
I will also make a recommendation, although it's a little bit, it's probably significantly less interesting, but it's the economics of it. Much of what I understand about like nursing homes and stuff is informed by a piece done on Last Week Tonight with John Oliver. And the episode title is long-term care. See if you can find that. You will learn a little bit more, I hope, about the sort of the economics that go into caregiving, as I was talking about earlier, that we were talking about earlier, the triaging that needs to happen in the sort of industrial nature of it. So that's something of I don't know, hopefully like politically important piece that will obviously hopefully catalyze more discussion and more learning from there. But that's a very mainstream, easy way to get into the topic of caregiving and disability justice and all that sort of things. In a way that, I don't know, maybe he's probably serves like me more than anyone else, to be honest. Anyway.
And we'll also say that a good chunk of the disability community is very active on Twitter. They're also quite active on TikTok, but TikTok is actively suppressing them, so you might have a harder time finding their content through TikTok. But on Twitter, they're very active, so if you can get into that crowd and have the algorithm show you their stuff, that would be a good place to start getting involved, because just these topics about consent are very common, because it's kind of central to a lot of the issues we face, because it's directly tied to our bodily autonomy and the fact that we're not seen as human, therefore not worthy of giving or rescinding consent, which basically is the root of a lot of our problems as a community. So I highly recommend taking to social media and searching for people who talk about disability and who live with disabilities, who have things to say and seek to share their experiences and, you know, stand in solidarity with those who have experienced something similar, and to empower each other and uplift each other and fight against the oppression that we've been faced with this whole time.
All right. Yeah, I already found Sin's Invalid on Twitter. They're good. Anyway, yeah, the are there, before we sort of do the outro, and I guess it's around the time we normally would, but are there any other sort of points we want to bring into this? Any other things we want to touch upon to commit to the recording? I'm trying to think of anything as well.
I think it needs to be said again, disabled people are sexy as fuck. It needs to be said again as many times as possible.
Yeah, maybe some.
Oh my god,
I'm
I just
inclined to think
remembered
there
this
are.
awful fetish. I just remembered the existence of an awful fetish. Oh, what's it called? It's ties to caregiving and seeing disabled people as like always needing to be helped and saved. Devotees. They are people with fetishes for disabled people. It's disgusting. Like, if you want to look it up and learn more about it, that's what it's called. Devotee.
Buyer beware kind of situation there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. In that case, I'll go ahead and outro us. Are we seeing at the moment? Yes. URL I have not checked, but I think that what is it called? That QR code links to our Discord server and or our link tree. So you can follow that to connect with the Disabled Non-Disabled Alliance in whatever fashion you would prefer, of the ones we offer. And other than that, I think that's it. Thank you all for those of you who are attending, just the officers and me, and those of you who are watching later, hopefully many more people, for coming, attending, watching, this meeting of Disabled Non-Disabled Alliance. As I say, I think the next thing that happens is going to be the deadline for the proposal to the Diversity Leadership Conference. Again, please shoot out whatever ideas you have that may be salient to that event, because I really want to do something just to get our name out there. I don't have any good ideas yet, so I'm devoid of good ideas. Therefore, the next thing that happens, I believe, is the party the Friday after finals, just in case y'all are done with finals by then. Come on down. Like it'll be in this same Zoom room I'm supposing, but it'll involve games and stuff that we'll plan between now and then in amongst our finals. Good times. I highly recommend being a college student. It's great. Okay. Thank you again to everybody who's watching later, especially, and hopefully you learned something today. If you did, like and subscribe. I don't know.
Yeah, and something else that I wanted to say is like, thank you all for watching our videos on Instagram, our videos on YouTube. It's really appreciated. And plus, this is our final like professional meeting. Next meeting is just going to be all games, but this meeting is our final one. Thank you all so much for listening to our conversations about so many different topics. That's really important to highlight.
There's much more to say, much more to do, but we as an organization and we as individuals and we as a society are going to try to make those beneficent changes happen.